Joining me now is Batia Ungasagon, Newsweek Deputy Opinion Editor and author of Second Class, How the Elites Betrayed America's Working Men and Women. And Batia, you nailed it in your book. You explained the Trump phenomenon and the political realignment that sees the affluent lean increasingly left towards the Democrats and working class people, aspirational Americans, the middle class, go to the right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We've seen a massive political realignment in America along class lines. So the biggest divider in America is not actually left versus right, as everybody saw on election night. It's the elites versus the working class. It's the credentialed, college educated people who work in the knowledge industry and people who work with their hands for a living, people who don't have a degree. And what happened over the last 50 years was the Democrats created an economy that was an upward transfer of wealth from the working class, the hardest working Americans, into the pockets of the elites, the chattering class, the political class, the economists who were creating this policy. And as a result, working class Americans of all races stopped seeing themselves reflected in the Democratic Party. And when Trump showed up on the scene, it's really amazing, Rita. How did he get all these Democrats to vote for him? He simply lifted the Democrats' pro labor, pro working class economic agenda right off of them. It was the Democrats who used to believe we need a strong border to protect working class wages. It was the Democrats who used to be in favor of trade wars and tariffs to protect the labor of American workers. And Donald Trump showed up and said, wow, no one is representing 60% of Americans. Come home. And that is exactly what he did. And now we're seeing the fruits of that labor as he walks away with millions and millions and millions of voters who were Democrats 50 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and 5 years ago.
It's incredible, that political realignment, lifelong Democrats now switching to Trump, switching to the Republicans. And you talked about the divide is a class divide. It's not a race, gender, and all the other issues that the media is hyper-focused on. And the data from the exit polls shows that the majority of households whose incomes were under $100,000 for the household voted for Trump, and the majority of households with an income of over $100,000 voted for Harris. And the numbers are almost perfect there. And do you see that changing? Do you see this political realignment sticking for the foreseeable future?
It all depends on where the parties go from here. So the GOP before Trump showed up was all neoliberalism. It was, free markets. And then there was, of course, the neoconservative piece of it. So it was, foreign wars and free markets, right? And social conservatism. None of those things resonate with working class Americans. They're anti-war, they hate free trade, and they're social moderates. They're not conservatives. They don't like abortion bans. Now, if the GOP after Trump goes right back to its version pre-Trump, the way the donor class is desperate for it to do, then of course they're going to lose all of these voters as well. If the Democratic Party learns the lesson here, which is don't call people racist for wanting to feed their children, right? If they go back to their embrace of strong borders, they could very easily win back a lot of these voters. The problem is that their donor class, the George Soroses of the world, want that open border. They really don't believe in nation states. They really don't believe in putting Americans first. And so you have this situation where the donor class of each side is very antithetical to the needs of working class Americans. And, we have one party that we have shown is willing to take on its elites, which is Donald Trump, who doesn't care what the elites think about him. And one side, unfortunately, that seems unwilling to take on its elites. So that's really what we're going to be looking for in the next 10 years.
I can't see the Democrats changing anytime soon. They, I think, are going to veer even more left. And it's early days, but they're not learning the lessons from this loss. They're just talking about race and gender again and blaming the American public for being too racist and too sexist to elect Harris. Now, the media did keep telling us that abortion was the key issue here, that women would deliver Kamala Harris a victory. How did so many in the media and how did so many pollsters get this election wrong?
So the polls have been historically inaccurate since Trump came on the scene, because, of course, if you're a Trump voter and you're used to hearing yourself called a Nazi by the experts, you're less willing to give them your time on a phone call with a pollster, right? And so they oversample for the college educated, they oversample for college educated women. The abortion problem here is this, Rita. You had the Democrats running on a made up problem, which is that there was going to be a national abortion ban, which Donald Trump very clearly said he would veto because he believes in the right to an abortion for 12 to 15 weeks and for exceptions for the mother's health, rape, and incest. So it was a made up fake problem that allowed rich, educated women to feel like the real oppressed class in this country. And Donald Trump was running on a real
Yeah.
problem, which is that working class men cannot afford to feed their families anymore. And I think the Democrats thought that, with the Obamas berating men to show up for this fake problem for rich women to protect the feelings of rich women, I think the left thought this would be a winning argument, when it turned out that it was working class women who showed up for their husbands and sons and for their dignity, because that was a real problem. And of course, working class men of all races who have just had it with a party that sneers at them, has contempt for them, has shipped their jobs overseas or imported 15 million people to do them here for less money. They're just sick of it. They're sick of being called racists for wanting to feed their family. Their grievances are real, and Donald Trump gave them that dignity back. And I think that this was a seismic shift, because it is undeniable what is happening now. The Democrats have become the party of leftist elites. They have thumbed their nose at labor. Their immense contempt for the working class, the backbone of this country, has been made so clear as they continue to blame voters for Donald Trump's dignity win, instead of saying he won because he gave dignity back to the American working class.
Batya Ungar-Sargon, your insights are always appreciated on this program. Thanks so much for your time this evening.